You didn't get poorer because you failed. You didn't get poorer because you made bad choices. You got poorer because someone changed the rules while you weren't looking. And by the time you noticed, 30% of your money was already gone. In 2019, life felt hard, but manageable. In 2023, it feels impossible. Same job, same effort, same hours. But suddenly rent is crushing you. Groceries feel like a luxury. Buying a house feels like a joke. And everyone keeps telling you the same thing. That's just inflation. As if inflation is weather. As if it just happened. As if no one caused it. That's the lie. Because inflation isn't random. It's engineered. And once you see how, you'll never look at money the same way again. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If prices went up 30%, but your salary didn't, where did that missing value go? It didn't vanish. Money doesn't work like that. It moved from you to someone else, quietly, legally, deliberately. This video is about that transfer. Here's the moment everything broke. March 2020. The world shuts down. Businesses close overnight. People stop spending. The stock market collapses, down 35% in weeks. Panic everywhere. And the most powerful financial institution on earth faces a decision. Do nothing and let markets fall, or intervene and change reality. They chose intervention, not slowly, not cautiously. They chose unlimited. On March 15, 2020, the Federal Reserve made an announcement so extreme it should have terrified everyone. They cut interest rates to zero, and they promised unlimited money creation. Unlimited. No cap, no ceiling, no exit plan. At that moment, the game changed. Here's the part most people never understand. The Federal Reserve doesn't print money like a printer. They create it digitally, with keystrokes. Numbers appear in accounts that didn't exist before, from nothing. And when the Fed creates money, it doesn't give it to workers. It doesn't give it to families. It doesn't give it to you. It gives it to banks. This is where the theft begins. The Fed buys government bonds and mortgage securities from banks. In exchange, banks receive brand new dollars, fresh, clean, unquestioned. Suddenly, banks are drowning in cash, and cash doesn't sit still. It hunts returns. Now pause here, because this matters. When banks receive trillions in new money, they have two options: lend it to regular people, use it to buy assets. In a crisis, lending to ordinary people is risky. Jobs are unstable. Businesses are closed. Credit risk is high. But buying assets, that's safe. Especially when the Fed just promised to protect markets at all costs. So that's exactly what happened. Money floods into stocks, bonds, real estate, corporate assets, and when trillions chase assets, prices explode. The stock market doesn't just recover, it rockets. By late 2021, stocks are nearly double their pandemic lows. Housing follows. A $300,000 house becomes $400,000, then $450,000. Not because it got better, not because wages exploded, but because money lost its value. Now, here's the psychological trick. They call this recovery, but recovery for who? If you owned assets before 2020, you didn't recover. You won if you didn't. You lost ground permanently. Let's make this painfully real. Imagine you're 28 years old in 2019. You've saved $30,000. You're disciplined, responsible. Homes in your area cost $300,000. You need $60,000 for a down payment. You're halfway there. 2 more years. That's the plan. Then 2020 happens. The Fed prints $4.5 trillion in just 2 years. That $300,000 house, now it's $450,000. Your target didn't move slowly, it jumped. Now you need $90,000. You saved another $20,000. You now have $50,000. But somehow, you're further away than before. You did everything right, and still lost. That's inflation theft. Your money didn't disappear, it was diluted. Like adding water to milk. Same container, less nutrition. And the dilution didn't hit everyone equally. That's the key. Because while you were saving, someone else was borrowing. at nearly zero interest. If you already owned stocks or property, the system worked for you. You could borrow against your assets at 1 to 2%. Use that borrowed money to buy more assets. And when prices rise, you profit with money that wasn't even yours. That's leverage. And leverage only works when interest rates are crushed and asset prices are inflated, which is exactly what the Fed engineered. Now compare that to you. You don't have millions in stocks. You can't borrow at 1%. Your options are credit cards at 18%, personal loans at 10%, or nothing at all. You don't get leverage, you get squeezed. This is where the gap explodes. From 2020 to 2022, the richest Americans gained trillions in wealth. The bottom half gained scraps and then lost it to inflation. Same economy, same crisis, completely different outcomes by design. And here's the most dangerous part. They told you inflation was temporary, transitory, but prices don't go back down. The rate of inflation slows, the damage stays. Once your rent jumps from $1,500 to $2,000, that's permanent. Your purchasing power is gone forever. And that loss compounds every year. So now you're paying more for rent, more for food, more for gas, more for everything, while your wages lag behind. And the system tells you this is normal. It isn't. It's extraction. But here's the question that changes everything. Why did the money go to banks first? Why not directly to people? Why did asset owners get rich first, while everyone else paid the bill? The answer exposes the real purpose of the system. And once you see it, you'll understand why this will happen again and again and again. The money didn't go to banks by accident. It went there because the system is built that way. And once you understand who controls the flow, you'll understand why you were never meant to win. Let's answer the question nobody asks. Why didn't the Federal Reserve give money directly to people? Why route $4.5 trillion through banks instead? The official answer sounds reasonable: stability, liquidity, preventing collapse. But the real answer is simpler, because the financial system comes before the public. Here's how the Federal Reserve actually works. It's not a normal government agency. It's a hybrid. 12 regional Federal Reserve banks exist across the country. Those banks are owned by private member banks: J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo. The same institutions the Fed is supposed to regulate are the ones closest to its money. That's not a conspiracy. That's the structure. Now look at the incentives. When crisis hits, the Fed has two priorities: keep banks solvent, keep asset markets functioning. Why? Because if banks fail, everything collapses. Payments stop, credit freezes, the system breaks. So the Fed protects banks at all costs. And protecting banks means inflating assets. This is why every crisis looks the same. 2008, money printing. 2020, money printing. Next crisis, money printing. Different headlines, same response. Because the goal is never you. The goal is to protect the financial system. And you are not the financial system. You are fuel for it. Economists have a name for what happens next. It's called the Cantillon effect. Here's what it means in plain English. Whoever gets new money first wins. Whoever gets it last pays. Banks receive fresh money before prices rise. They buy assets while they're still cheap. By the time that money reaches workers through wages, prices have already adjusted upward. You get higher costs without higher purchasing power. You get inflation without benefit. This is why inflation feels unfair, because it is. It's not evenly distributed, it's targeted. Let's look at the numbers. From 2020 to 2022, the Fed prints $4.5 trillion. Asset prices rise 30 to 90%, wages rise 5 to 10%. That gap, that's the theft. The wealthy didn't get richer because they worked harder. They got richer because they were closer to the money source. If you owned stocks in March 2020, you watched them double. If you owned a home, your equity exploded. If you owned nothing, you watched life get more expensive. And now comes the most dangerous illusion. They sent you stimulus checks. $12 billion $6,001,400, just enough to make it feel fair. But compare the scale. Banks received trillions. You received a few thousand. If that $4.5 trillion had been divided evenly, every American would have received over $13,000. A family of four, more than $50,000. Instead, that money inflated assets you don't own. And once prices rise, they never come back down. That's the trap. In 2022, the Fed panicked. Inflation was out of control. So they did the opposite. They raised interest rates fast, 0 to 5% in record time. This was supposed to fix inflation, but it created a new problem. Now you face the worst combination possible: high prices and high interest rates. Homes didn't get cheaper, they just became impossible to finance. A $450,000 house at 7% interest costs triple what it did in 2019. Your income didn't triple, your payment did. So who wins now? The people who already own assets. They locked in cheap debt earlier. They rent at inflated prices now. Corporate landlords bought tens of thousands of homes during the Lorot era. Now they collect rent from people who can never afford to buy. You didn't just lose a house. You lost the future option to own one. This is how a generation gets trapped. Permanent renters. Permanent debtors. Permanent inflation victims. All while being told this is normal. But here's the most brutal truth. The Fed can't fix this anymore. If they cut rates again, inflation explodes. If they keep rates high, the economy breaks. They used all their tools. Too much money was printed. Too much debt was created. Too many assets were inflated. The damage is locked in, which leads to the final realization. This wasn't a one-time event. It's a cycle. And the next time it happens, it will be bigger. The only question is whether you'll see it coming. Because in part 3, we're going to expose what this means for your future and how the system forces you to lose again. And once you understand that, you'll never look at inflation the same way again. What if I told you this system isn't broken? What if it's doing exactly what it was designed to do? Because once you see the end game, you'll realize this wasn't just inflation. It was a permanent reset of who gets to own the future. Let's talk about you, not theory, not macroeconomics, your life, your timeline. If you're in your 20s or 30s, here's the brutal math. You earn wages. Wages grow slowly. Assets inflate fast. That gap is widening every year, and the Federal Reserve is accelerating it. Since 1980, real wages up about 20%, stocks and real estate up 500% plus. That's not productivity, that's policy. The system rewards ownership. It punishes labor. If you work for money, you lose. If you own assets, money works for you. And inflation is the weapon that enforces this divide. Here's the part nobody tells you. Once prices rise, they don't come down. Inflation isn't temporary, it's cumulative. Your rent doesn't reset. Your groceries don't rewind. Your home prices don't normalize. The damage stays forever. So, when politicians say inflation is cooling, what they really mean is prices are rising slower than before, not falling, never falling. This means your purchasing power is permanently lower. Every dollar you earn buys less every year, unless you own assets. Now look at housing. Homeownership used to be a milestone. Now it's a moat. In 2019, a house cost $300,000 at 3%. In 2024, it costs $450,000 at 7%. Same house, triple payment. That's not a market. That's exclusion. And who filled the gap? Institutions. BlackRock. They bought everything. They rent it back to you. You don't build equity. You build their balance sheet. This is how serfdom rebrands itself. No chains, just contracts. No castles, just portfolios. And here's the final trap. The Federal Reserve will do this again because they have no alternative. Every crisis demands intervention. Every intervention means money printing. Every round transfers more wealth upward. The cycle feeds itself. Next crisis, markets crash, fear spikes, Fed prints, asset owners recover first. You absorb the inflation again This is why understanding inflation matters, not as an economic concept, as a survival skill. Because once you see inflation as theft, you stop trusting official narratives. You stop waiting for normal to return. You realize the game isn't fair, and hasn't been for a long time. This isn't capitalism, it's monetary feudalism. A system where those closest to money creation own everything, and everyone else rents their life. So here's the real takeaway. The Fed didn't steal your money overnight. They stole it quietly, through dilution, through policy, through inflation. $4.5 trillion created. 30% of your purchasing power gone. Not lost, transferred. And unless something fundamentally changes, this will define the rest of your life. Lower ownership, higher debt, permanent inflation. That's the future they've designed. The only question left is this. Now that you see the system, will you keep playing it blindly? Or will you start protecting yourself from the next round of theft? Because it's coming, and next time, it won't be subtle.